Coming up on Market to Market. Republican victories in the midterm elections bring new faces to leadership positions in Congress. Voters in several states say no on GMOs, at least when it comes to mandatory labeling of them. And Western cattle ranchers work with government officials in an attempt to protect the greater sage grouse. Those stories and market analysis with Mark Gold next.
Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com. This is the Friday, November 7 edition of Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America.
Hello, I'm Mike Pearson. 3 days after voters expressed their frustration with the economy, the government announced Friday that employers went on a hiring spree in October. According to the Labor Department, U.S. employers added 214,000 positions to their payrolls last month. Combined with upward revisions to August and September figures, at least 200,000 jobs have been created in each of the past 9 months. That's the longest stretch in nearly 20 years. The hiring surge helped lower the U.S. unemployment rate 0.1 of a point to 5.8%, reflecting its lowest level since July of 2008. And while average hourly wages rose only slightly, Wall Street welcomed the upbeat jobs report as the Dow settled Friday at yet another record high. Voters identified the economy as their top concern in Tuesday's elections. And despite a few tight races, the Republicans will have new faces in congressional leadership next year.
I've heard your concerns. I've made them my own. You will be heard in Washington.
Election night turned into a grand old party Tuesday as Republicans took back the majority in the U.S. Senate and built on their lead in the House. Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell survived a challenge, winning a trip back to Washington, where he's the presumed majority leader and will drive the agenda during the final 2 years of Obama's presidency.
Well, the Senate was the problem, not the House. The House passed over 300 pieces of legislation, many of them on a bipartisan basis, and nothing was done with them in the Senate. The American people have changed the Senate. So I think we have an obligation to change the behavior of the Senate and to begin to function again.
Good afternoon, everybody. Have a seat.
President Obama held a post-election news conference offering an olive branch to the incoming majority and a pledge to work together.
You know, actually, I would enjoy having some Kentucky bourbon with Mitch McConnell. I don't know what his preferred drink is, but you know, my interactions with Mitch McConnell, he has always been very straightforward with me. To his credit, he has never made a promise that he couldn't deliver.
Thanks to all of you, we are heading to Washington, and we are going to make them squeal.
Joni Ernst will be Iowa's first female member of Congress with her victory for Iowa's open U.S. Senate seat. Ernst was one of 7 election night Republican pickups nationwide. 2 more races are still too close to call in the case of Alaska and Louisiana, headed for a runoff.
The road to a Republican majority is now running right through Kansas.
Senator Pat Roberts won re-election in Kansas, fending off an independent challenger, and will likely chair the Senate Agriculture Committee. On the campaign trail, Roberts said he will reopen the most recent farm bill to examine food assistance programs.
If you qualify on the income and the asset side, you'll stay on the program.
Texas Congressman Mike Conaway is likely going to seek the chair of the House Agriculture Committee, and the Lone Star State Republican echoed the call for reform of SNAP. The nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics estimates more than $4 billion was spent on the congressional races alone.
As a farmer and a new mom.
Money was also spent in states considering ballot initiatives. In Oregon, almost $30 million was spent on one single ballot initiative. Voters in the 5 states considering minimum wage increases on the ballot approved all of them. But Illinois' approval still must be validated by the state's legislature. North Dakotans overwhelmingly rejected Measure 5, which would have dedicated possibly billions of dollars in Bakken oil and gas revenue to conservation projects.
You shouldn't know whether your food is genetically modified.
Vote.
And calls for mandatory labeling of GMOs were DOA in 3 states this week. Colorado's labeling initiative was soundly defeated, while Oregon's effort to mandate genetically modified classifications on those food was close, but turned down. The proposal would have applied to raw and packaged food produced entirely or partially by genetic engineering and would not have applied to food in restaurants. And when the dust settled Tuesday night, Vermont remained the only state in the U.S. mandating GMO labeling. In Hawaii, however, voters in Maui County opted to temporarily ban the cultivation of genetically engineered crops. Oregon voters did approve the recreational use of marijuana, as did a majority of voters in Alaska and Washington, D.C. However, the issue in the nation's capital is not completely resolved, as the provision must still be approved by Congress. After enduring several years of severe drought, ranchers are beginning to rebuild herds that were downsized due to lack of forage. Currently, the U.S. cattle herd is estimated at 88 million head. That's its lowest level in 63 years. But even if the arid conditions subside, ranchers in the West may face an even bigger threat. Within the next 10 months, the federal government must decide whether the greater sage grouse will be placed on the endangered species list. And Western ranchers, energy companies, and rural communities are concerned over the potential implications of the decision. Paul Yeager explains.
Since 1985, the number of greater sage grouse, a chicken-sized bird that feeds mainly on sagebrush, has declined an estimated 30% to somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000. Experts point to disruption or fragmentation of nesting areas as the primary problem. The 4 biggest factors behind fragmentation, depending on the region, are conifer trees pushing out sagebrush, invasive grasses that feed wildfires, developments related to oil, gas, and wind energy, and conversion of rangeland to crop production. According to the Sage Grouse Initiative, which includes a mix of government and private groups, the court-ordered decision could affect ranchers and others in the West the same way the northern spotted owl designation in 1990 affected the logging industry in the Pacific Northwest. But there's one key distinction. The territory potentially affected by the sage grouse decision is 10 times larger. The greater sage grouse range includes 165 million acres in 11 states. While the greater sage grouse range is large, it is now about half of what it once was. 64% of the current greater sage grouse territory is federally owned, and most falls under the authority of the Bureau of Land Management.
More or less, we have roughly 50% of the population of sage grouse on the public lands in the western United States. And so it's a very high priority resource issue for us, and it's right up there at the top, and it's one of the things that we focus on almost daily.
The Fish and Wildlife Service, which is charged with protecting species that may be threatened, decided in 2005, after looking at several subspecies of grouse, that the greater sage grouse would not be listed as threatened. Environmental groups sued, however, and a federal judge overturned the finding in 2007. By 2010, the agency said the bird should be protected, but western states were given a grace period to begin rebuilding the greater sage grouse population. If federal authorities determine by next September's deadline that the efforts have failed to adequately address the problem, rules protecting the bird's habitat will be put in place. One of the groups that sued, the Center for Biological Diversity, believed the states failed to protect the birds adequately, and as a result, the federal government needed to step in. Randy Spivak, the center's public land program director, said the grouse is an important indicator species in sagebrush habitat. If it isn't doing well, numerous others will likely struggle. In recent years, ranchers have paid the Bureau of Land Management $1.35 per animal unit month, which is the amount of forage needed to support an animal unit grazing for 1 month. And federal officials have proposed increasing that fee by 75% in 2015. But some ranchers believe the looming sage grouse decision poses an even greater threat to their livelihoods.
We're going to be in the epicenter of some pretty significant sage grouse habitat, and there's potential for the sage grouse to be listed on the endangered species list, and we're concerned about how what ramifications are going to be in terms of limiting grazing use on those lands.
In addition to ranchers, oil, gas, and wind energy companies, recreational users, and others stand to lose access to some western federal lands, at least during certain times of the year, if the land-dwelling bird is, in fact, listed as a threatened or endangered species.
It could be significant because the nesting and laying and hatching time period coincides with spring turnout, and there's the possibility of deferring grazing or restricting grazing on normal spring turnout pastures to accommodate the sage grouse.
Such restrictions could force some ranchers to keep cattle or sheep on feed longer or search for other available rangeland, which would likely become scarce if BLM land was no longer available during the spring. The 11 affected states, seeing the potential impact on rural communities, are scrambling to make use of remaining time. The states with the largest percentages of the bird's habitat are Wyoming, Montana, Nevada, and Idaho.
I think all of us are tired of sort of fighting this in the court systems and letting individual judges decide our future and our fate when we know the land and we know the species better than they.
In some states, juniper trees are being cut to return the land to a sagebrush habitat. Elsewhere, areas are being set aside for conservation, or greater efforts are being made to suppress wildfires that could destroy nesting areas. Oil or gas exploration has been limited in some states.
Typically, livestock grazing is not one of the major threats to sage grouse survival or improvement. It is a threat, it's one of many, but it's not one of the major threats. The impact that we see, though, is from just that use as well as other uses that impact the same rangelands, the same habitat that's available for the sage grouse. And so, whether it's oil and gas development, whether it's recreation use, whether it's livestock grazing, all those things combined are the factors that we're having to deal with.
The Sage Grouse Initiative was launched in 2010 by the government's Natural Resources Conservation Service. It has signed on as partners more than 60 private and public organizations, ranging from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to ConocoPhillips to the National Audubon Society. Nearly 1,000 ranchers have enrolled land in programs designed to help the grouse.
This has been one of the biggest combined efforts that I've ever seen on any front. And each of the western states that have sage grouse populations are at the table. There are many folks that understand the importance of this issue, and they are rallying together to try and find solutions and try to develop plans that will help us as we move into the future.
For Market to Market, I'm Paul Yeager.
Next, the Market to Market report.
A stronger dollar pressured grain futures prices this week as the trade mulled the impact of next week's estimates on supply and demand. For the week, December wheat lost 18 cents, while the nearby corn contract moved nearly 10 cents lower. The rare harvest rally in soybeans also ran out of steam as the January contract declined by 13 cents. Nearby meal prices, however, posted a modest gain of $1.40 per ton. In the softs, cotton gave back most of last week's gain as the December contract declined by nearly 50 cents per hundredweight. In the dairy market, December Class 3 milk gained 23 cents, while the deferred contract declined by 27. Over in livestock, the December cattle contract gained 75 cents. Nearby feeders advanced by nearly $4, and the December lean hog contract improved by 75 cents. In the financials, the euro lost 9 basis points against the dollar. Crude oil continued its decline as the December contract settled with a weekly loss of nearly $2 per barrel. COMEX gold gave up $1.80 per ounce, and the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index lost more than 6 points to settle at 534 even. Here now to lend us his insight on these and other trends is one of our regular market analysts, Mark Gold. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks. Nice to be here again.
Well, let's jump right into the wheat market. As we mentioned at the top of the section there, stronger dollar pressuring wheat prices. Is that the main driver of the wheat price movement lower this week?
You know, we've seen just terrible exports in the wheat the last several weeks. And I think as much as anything, it's a function of the dollar, good competition around the world. The Russian ruble has taken a big hit, which is making their wheat very cheap around the world. So it's been a little bit of everything in this wheat market, good production, prospects. We've had decent rains in Kansas, some rains in Oklahoma and Texas, and the Midwest is looking pretty good for the soft wheat as well. So we've had this driving down, and I think one of the keys is since we ended the QE2 program, the dollar has strengthened. And then we had the elections this week, which added another kick to the dollar. And a lot of smart analysts, some of the guys I listen to, believe that the dollar could be headed toward a longer-term rally for many, many years. That is not going to bode well, and I think that's why we saw these corn and wheat prices in particular taking a hit in here because of this dollar. The dollar, I believe, is certainly on its way to 90 cents. We're at 87.80 roughly tonight. Can we hit 90 quickly? I believe we can. And then I think we'd take a look at maybe 93, 94 at some point. But certainly a stronger dollar is not going to be helpful toward U.S. exports.
Now, before we began the recession, the dollar was up in that 114 to 120 range. Do the analysts you've listened to predict that as being a possibility over the long term?
I don't know if we can go that high right now. We'd have to see some changes, I think, fundamentally in the economy to see that. But certainly the stronger dollar looks like it's here for a while. I've been pretty friendly to the dollar since we got back over 80 cents, and I think that really once we close over 90, that opens up another door to maybe another 5 to 8 cents higher.
Okay. Now on the wheat export side, U.S. wheat is still some of the highest quality wheat, but it's just not able to command a premium?
You know, that's been the issue. The quality is certainly the best in the United States, hands down, but when we're competing against such cheaper products out there, it's really hurting the export market. On the good side of the wheat market, because of what's happening in the meal market, we are seeing, I believe, more domestic feeding of wheat into particularly the East Coast. So that's a little bit helpful for this wheat. One thing we have to watch in this wheat market coming up, we're expecting this major cold front to come in during the week. We expect some very cold temperatures. It won't be enough per se to do any winter kill damage, way too early for that, but it could force the wheat into an early dormancy, which could have an impact down the road on how susceptible the wheat could be to a winter kill. So we'll have to watch these temperatures next week. You know, again, at these kind of levels, even though we've had these poor exports and the dollar stronger, I don't want to be overly bearish to wheat, but certainly if we could get the dollar to back off, that would help the wheat market.
All right. As we jump over into the corn market, we have been on an uptrend. We saw a key bullish reversal at the end of October there. Even with this week down almost 10 cents, are we still in that up channel, do you figure?
Well, we made our lows really the first week of October. We were able to rally the corn as much because of the bean market and the meal market as anything else. We'll see what the report has to say on Monday. I don't believe it's going to be as bearish as I would have thought it would have been even a month ago. I think some of the Informa numbers are pretty close, 174 and change. Production 14.4 to 14.5, somewhere in that range. We still have plenty of corn. The dollar is not going to help that. The exports have really fallen off here, and that's going to be, I think, a trending pattern for the next several months perhaps. So we had a nice rally in this corn market, 50, 60 cents. It's gotten December 15 corn back over $4. It's giving you some opportunities that a month ago we didn't think were here.
For folks sitting on cash corn, maybe if you're looking at a storage constraint, do you go ahead and sell into this market, or do you hold it a little while?
I would definitely be selling into this market. We've had a 50, 60 cent rally, like I said. We're up around that 370 level. It's an opportunity, particularly if your basis is pretty good. Farmers have been holding back, not selling so much. And with the rail situation, in some areas, if they've got rail, the basis is not too bad. I'd go ahead and sell it. If you are selling any grain here, whether it's corn, wheat, or beans, I would certainly be looking to buy back a call option, because I do believe over the long haul we could see some up in this market. So if you're scared of pulling the trigger right here, go ahead and sell some grain, buy a call option to back it up.
Especially if, as you mentioned, you've got a favorable basis in your area.
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't you take that risk off the table?
Absolutely.
Well, now, as we jump down into the bean market, we've got a question from one of our Twitter followers. He's the Hedge Whisperer over in Virginia, and he's curious, how do you protect November 15 beans with puts so these futures don't make him sell an old car?
I guess he's talking to the options whisperer here. You have to look out for November 15 beans, you have to look out, and you look at the corn-bean ratio out to next year, and it's certainly favoring the beans. We know that if the Lord helps them down in South America, we're looking at huge crops there. We already have a pretty, no matter what the report says on Monday, huge world carryouts in the beans. And add that to the South Americans, add that to guys incentivized to plant more beans next year here in the U.S. In my opinion, even though we've broken from these $16, $17 highs, we've put $1.50 back onto this bean market in the last 30 days. It's given you an opportunity for new crop beans in 15 to look at some put spreads, like a 970, 770 put spread. It's right around 50 cents, spend 50 cents to protect that $2 of risk. Now people say, can you really go to 770 in this bean market? Well, if we could go to $9 with the carryouts we had this year, if we have world carryouts that really bust a gut next year, can sub $8 beans be in the cards? I don't know if we're going there, but that's the risk. And if you look at the charts, all the real long-term trend lines come in right around $7.90 to $8. So I think that's a legitimate spread to give you some good protection. Let's hope we don't need it. Hope you spend the 50 cents on that put spread and beans go to $14 or $15 for whatever reason. You can live with that. What you can't live with is 12 months from now looking at $7 or $7.50 cash beans and not having a plan for it.
That's right. Now, the play for folks in finishing up harvest today has been get rid of the beans, go ahead, sell them into this market. Is that something you'd advise folks if they're still wrapping up bean harvest?
If you've got the beans, go ahead and sell them. The market's begging for the beans right now. Go ahead, sell them. I would certainly re-own it with a call option here to keep the upside open. We don't know what the report's going to say on Monday. And in the short run, I think there's some upside potential in this market until we really get a good handle on the Brazilian crop. But I think there's an opportunity here right now on this rally. Get them sold, buy a call option, and see where we can go with it.
Would you go January, March call, something in the
I'd
more
probably
nearby?
go out to the March calls. I think that gives you pretty good protection through the summer, or excuse me, through the winter months here to see what the Brazilian crop does.
All right. Well, now let's jump into the livestock market. We're up this week on the fat cattle side, 75 cents. Again, we seem to have found some relative stability up there. Is demand still plugging along?
Demand is still there. There's no question about it. The president's going to be in China. They're going to be looking to come up with some kind of beef export program to China. I don't know if they'll get it done, but that could certainly be a little bit helpful out here. But in the U.S. right now, as you've mentioned, we've got the low cattle numbers. They're still low. We still have decent demand for the cattle. We've seen the wholesale beef go through some pretty good fluctuations here, up $1.50, down $1.50. The cash market has gone from 170 down to 166 today, so we've softened that up a little bit. Have we seen the highs? I'm not quite convinced of that yet, but I think what's going to be key is watching the cattle the first couple of weeks of the new year. If that direction is on the downside, then I'd say whatever highs we make between now and the end of the year are going to be the highs for quite some time.
That post-Christmas market could set the tone for the entire 2015.
Yeah, post first of the year, not so much Christmas week, but after New Year's, looking at those first 2 weeks, I think could really set the tone in a major way here.
All right, now as we look down at the feeder cattle market, we saw surprising strength this week, up almost $4. Is there a chance that market could rally back up to that $240 range?
I suppose it could. I find it fascinating to see the strength in this cattle market and just what it's done in the last 12 months, let alone the last 2 months out here. We have got prices that your dad dreamed of, that farmers never thought they would ever see. And now they're kind of complacent about it because we haven't had one of these spike highs followed by the hard drop off. Because the cattle numbers are so low and demand has been good. The stock market's certainly been helping, giving guys, they said coming out of the exit polls, everybody's worried about the economy. You got the stock market at all-time highs. You've got unemployment, not great, granted they're not great jobs, but the economy is certainly better. I'm not sure why they're so worried about the economy. But as long as the economy stays good, stock market stays good, the cattle market should stay good. And could we make new highs in these feeders? I suppose we can. As a risk manager, I don't know if feeders are going to go to 280 or 300 or whether they're going back to 160. I do know that it's an opportunity to spend $4 to $5 a hundred to protect an enormous risk in case, for whatever reason, this cattle market moves south.
Now, Mark, we've got about 30 seconds left. What are your thoughts on this hog market? Again, relative stability? Do you see that continuing?
Yeah, I believe so. Certainly in the poultry and the hog business, we've created a lot of production here. We've got cheap feed relatively to what it's been over the last several years. So guys are really gearing up, and we've seen this big increase in production in both hogs and chickens. Now, eventually, those cheap prices are going to force that cattle market down, I'm guessing, at some point. But in the meantime, we've kind of found this $85 to $90 level in the hog market. I don't see it taking out much under $80. I don't see it getting really too much over 100. I think we're going to be kind of stuck in a range here for a while.
All right. Mark Gold, thank you for taking the time to join us this week. That wraps up this edition of Market to Market, but we will continue our discussion and answer some of your questions in our Market Plus segment online. You'll also find audio podcasts and streaming video of our program, as well as links to our Twitter feed, Facebook page, and the rest of our social media outlets exclusively at the Market to Market website. And be sure to join us next week when we'll learn how technological innovations are revolutionizing commodity trading. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Mike Pearson. Have a great week.
Market to Market is a production of Iowa Public Television, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com.